City cigar factory of the 1870s, one of the workers was a man especially concerned with the problems of the wage earner. His name was Gompers. He was a labor organizer. Gompers could see in his own trade the growing insecurity of the American worker, despite the rapid growth of industry since the Civil War. Newly arrived immigrants, women and children competed with experienced workers for the same jobs. Besides, new tools were being used. These tools allowed the unskilled workers to produce more goods than the skilled workers had been able to produce with their slower hand methods. Because of these conditions, an employer could pay low wages to both skilled and unskilled laborers for long hours. Conditions were the same nearly everywhere. It was becoming more and more difficult for skilled or unskilled workers to earn an adequate living. Gompers felt strongly that working conditions needed to be improved and wages raised. And he believed workers could accomplish this through unions. In 1873, an economic depression closed many factories and forced many men out of work. With so many workers unemployed, the effectiveness of almost all organized labor activity in America was diminished. Men were eager to have any kind of work, regardless of conditions. And those who had no work were willing to listen to anyone who offered an answer to their problems. A few political radicals advocated violent action to solve labor's problems. But the workers' goal did not become revolutionary. They only wanted jobs. As conditions grew worse, railroad workers, protesting a 10% reduction in wages, went on strike in 1877 across the nation. Magazines of the time illustrated the railroad strike as developing into uncontrolled mob action in a number of cities. Some workers did resort to violence, endangering lives, damaging property, paralyzing railroad transportation, as they demanded restoration of wages. In key railroad cities, the violence of the strike grew. Armed troops were used to suppress the workers. Many strikers were killed. Public opinion was generally anti-labor. It blamed the strikers for the violence. The New York Tribune wrote, "Only force can subdue this ignorant rabble with hungry mouths." The New York Herald compared the mob with a wild beast that must be shot down. The railroad strike was crushed, and the defeated workers returned to their jobs, submitting to the conditions that had previously prevailed. Gompers opposed radicalism, but still believed that a strike was a necessary weapon of labor.
Yes, our union is going to strike. But for it to be successful, there must be no violence, no rioting, no danger to human life.
Yes.
And remind the men that the union will provide them and their families with food and money.
I will, Sam.
Membership dues they paid will provide the money. Good luck.
The strike was a strong weapon of labor. But strikes and their demands were naturally resented by an employer. He believed he had the right to set the conditions of employment and to bargain with employees as individuals. After all, he reasoned, this was his business. Occasionally, workers who had complaints found that they had been locked out from their places of work. Their employer would not let them return to work until they accepted his terms. Sometimes an employer would force his employees to sign an agreement. known as an ironclad oath, if they wanted to continue working for it. This was an agreement not to participate in any form of organized labor activity. In this way, employers tried to avoid strikes. When they learned of workers who participated in labor agitation, employers often entered their names on a so-called blacklist, which was circulated. Another employer would not hire a man whose name was on the list. Samuel Gompers, for a time, was blacklisted because of his union activities. The blacklist was one of a number of effective means that management began using to restrict the activity of organized labor. As prosperity slowly returned to America in the 1880s, a national labor organization began growing under the leadership of Terence V. Powderly. Leaders of this organization, the Knights of Labor, sought to enroll all workers, skilled and unskilled, in a single unified labor organization. The Knights conducted some successful strikes against the railroads and a number of other big industries. Skilled and non-skilled workers eagerly joined this organization. And by 1886, membership had grown to 700,000. But the growing size of the organization made it unwieldy. A series of unsuccessful strikes and other troubles soon led to its collapse. Moreover, newspaper reports of extreme violence in labor disturbances, such as the throwing of a bomb in the Chicago Haymarket riot of 1886, further weakened the effectiveness of all labor organizations. However, in December of 1886, at a Columbus, Ohio convention, an entirely new kind of national labor union emerged based on an earlier organization formed in 1881. This new group was called the American Federation of Labor, and Samuel Gompers was elected its first president.
My friends, the American Federation of Labor will increase the strength and effectiveness of the trade unions by bringing them together in this central organization.
So began the growth of the AFL, with a membership of some 25 affiliated trade unions, whose roles included carpenters, tailors, bakers, printers, workers in the iron and steel industry, miners, cigar makers, generally skilled workers, about 138,000 in all. It was Gompers' leadership that gave direction to the American Federation of Labor. He edited a labor newspaper, issued union charters, handled all routine union business, and wrote innumerable letters to explain the AFL's purpose.
We will support national trade unions in winning recognition from employers, in seeking collective bargaining agreements, and in conducting strikes and boycotts when other measures fail.
Despite Gompers' strong belief that strikes were necessary, two disastrous strikes slowed the growth of the AFL. Americans learned of the strikes through magazine illustrations of that day. In Homestead, Pennsylvania, in 1892, a battle occurred between steel strikers and detectives hired by their company. The state militia and then strikebreakers brought an end to the strike. After this strike, the steel industry remained generally unorganized for 45 years. In 1894, a strike begun in Chicago by workers at the Pullman Palace Car Company was taken up by members of Eugene V. Debs' American Railway Union, and a nationwide railway strike developed. The violence of the strike seriously interrupted the nation's transportation system. When federal troops were used to end the railroad strike, some labor officials asked Gompers to call a general strike.
Yes, sir. The American Federation of Labor sympathizes with the railway workers, but it cannot support them in a general strike. Such a general strike would turn the public against us and make it difficult for us to achieve our long-range goals. I also strongly believe that labor must not seek to set itself up as a substitute for capitalism, but must confine its activities primarily to seeking better wages and better working conditions.
Yes, Mr. Gompers.
Above all, labor must avoid all efforts to establish a separate political labor party or participate directly in politics. As our organization slowly grows, strengthens its position, labor can then reward its friends and punish its enemies without regard to political affiliation.
In the election of 1912, the strength of the AFL helped elect candidates favorable to labor. And in 1914, when Congress passed the Clayton Act, labor at last had gained the first step toward the recognition it sought. The law specifically declared that the labor of a human being is not a commodity or article of commerce. In the years to follow, other unions of workers developed, independent unions of a single trade, and organizations made of workers of many trades, such as the Congress of Industrial Organizations. As the labor movement continued, workers gained the right to organize and bargain collectively, and through the right to strike, the labor movement increased its strength and effectiveness, gaining recognition and acceptance for its members. Labor unionism in America today, with the merger of the AFL and the CIO, has reached a position of influence far greater than that envisioned by the dedicated pioneers of the labor movement. Out of its beginnings in the 19th century has come a vigorous American labor movement that has been a significant factor in the growth of America's strength and prosperity.